Alright, so this video is going to have spoilers for Final Fantasy VII Remake and the original Final Fantasy VII. Viewers, I finished Final Fantasy Remake a couple of days ago, and I wanted to give it some time to process. I wanted people to be able to have time to finish the game, and I was very, very upset at the end of it. I'm not even gonna lie. And I know a lot of other people are upset or are wondering what the heck was going on in this game. I'm gonna come out with two different disclaimers here. One, I'm not using the original Final Fantasy VII as a holy grail of all things Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VII is not my favorite Final Fantasy. I do understand that back in 1997, this was one of the most groundbreaking games or RPGs of all time, and I really appreciate its impact and bringing JRPGs into the light, or RPGs in general, the impact that it's had on the gaming community over time, because it brought a lot of casual people into that RPG realm. My second disclaimer is that if you enjoyed Final Fantasy Remake, don't take my opinion as fact. I think Final Fantasy VII Remake is a completely flawed masterpiece. I was completely okay with the fact that there were subtle changes. As you play this game, you realize that it's completely fleshed out the Midgar section of the original game. So for those who haven't played the OG Final Fantasy VII game, this game takes place in maybe the first 8 or so hours of Final Fantasy VII, the original. A lot of it takes place in the city of Midgar, which a lot of people wanted to see more of in the past. You know, it left a lot to be desired, and I think it was a decent choice saying, okay, if you're gonna split this up into parts, at least dedicate this entire game to Midgar, the citizens of Midgar, and our characters meeting for the first time, as well as setting up Shinra and Sephiroth as a villain. So I think it does a great job fleshing out those characters. Some of the side quests are a little redundant, but as you go through it, I think it's just a very well told version of the original game and the events that took place in the original game. A lot of characters that I wanted to see fleshed out, like the Turks, for instance. I'm not counting all the other games, like the other spin-offs, but we get to see like a lot of those original, very authentic character interactions that we would expect once you improve a story or characters, you know, for a modern audience versus what was released in 97. I think they do a great job picking up those characters from 97 and kind of giving them a fresh coat of paint for this remake. And I think the voice actors really get into it. They do a great job. I think it was casted very well.
I'm not some princess who needs to be coddled. Shit.
There wasn't really that much awkward delivery that you would expect in a game like this, so I think the voice actors really carried it. Battle mechanics took some time for me to get used to, but I think it's definitely a compilation of all the great things from all of the different games from Square in the last, let's say, decade or over a decade. You know, it combines elements from Final Fantasy 13, it combines elements from Kingdom Hearts, it combines elements from Final Fantasy 15, and it takes the best of all those worlds to make a fresh start with Final Fantasy VII. I understood coming into this that this was not going to be a one-to-one replica of the Midgar section from the original game, nor was I expecting that. I think I along with a lot of other fans, were expecting subtle changes or changes that would help to expand or write a better story versus the original. And I think for the most part, in a majority of the chapters in this game, they do a great job with that. So throughout this game, we're introduced to some new antagonists, or some new forces for that matter. And these are called arbiters of fate. They're robed figures, and you can tell they're kind of supernatural. They're floating in the air, and they're constantly intervening in certain scenes. And I don't really know if they're out to hurt people or if they're not at the very beginning. And then over time, you realize that these are like a neutral force in the world, trying to stop certain events from veering off the original path that took place in the original game. And it's not that I had a complete issue with that plot point. That's perfectly fine. But I think the way these characters, these forces were introduced was driving me insane. Because on one hand, you don't know if everyone can see these things. It's implied that they can't be seen, but certain characters can see them. Is there some potential that these characters have that they can see these whispers? They're called whispers, by the way. Do they have some potential or like some inherent ability to see whispers? Or do these things show themselves to certain people? You know, it's not clear, because every time these come around, you know, some characters are like, what the hell were those? Or what the heck was that? And then they just kind of move on with life. If you have a flood of figures just flying through your city, they're like harassing you and attacking you, You don't think to yourself like,
hey, did anyone else see that?
you know, apparently some of the characters look crazy, like attacking them, while others didn't see them. And it just wasn't really ingrained into who was able to see these whispers and who was. We find out that they're trying to keep certain things on the original plot. So anytime there's any subtle change or anything that would change that timeline one way or another, they're there to correct that. This game is mostly a remake of the original Final Fantasy VII until way toward the end, where people start to give us exposition on these things, and we just have to believe it. If these characters don't know what happened in the original game, how are they supposed to know how to avoid these things? Like, how do they know what their decisions are supposed to be? If I'm just walking around in my town and these hooded figures are following me trying to correct destiny, isn't it technically my destiny to veer off the path? I accept them for what they are. And then the plot continues as normal. There's a few subtle changes that I could get behind, and it betters the characters. There's new characters introduced, which I'm perfectly fine with. But similarly to the Whispers, Sephiroth appears in this game a lot more. This is gripe number 2. Now I'm okay with the understanding that Cloud has a certain link to Sephiroth, and he sees Sephiroth and hallucinates and has a bit of a PTSD moment for reasons that aren't explained in this game as of yet. And I think that backstory is super important to introducing Sephiroth as a villain. And they haven't gotten to that part yet. They haven't explained what happened between Cloud and Sephiroth. People who have never touched Final Fantasy VII at all, new people coming into the series know who Cloud is, and they know who Sephiroth is, right? But this game doesn't explain that. I've heard from people who've never touched this game before from 1997 that they're so curious to finally see what's going on between Cloud and Sephiroth. This game does not do that, sadly. And it drives me insane because if you're trying to introduce this to new audiences, then make the plot make sense. Expand on the original, and you can do subtle changes here and there to say, oh, well, this is different. But they had to write in a way to explain these subtle changes, and I think that's where the game really tanks story-wise. So Sephiroth apparently knows more than he lets on. He knows things are different. He's breaking the fourth wall. He's essentially the Deadpool of this game, and he understands what the original timeline's supposed to be, and I think he's starting to mess with it. I think that's the implication there, and that's why these arbiters of fate and whispers are coming around and trying to correct them. They're basically fighting against Sephiroth's will. Sephiroth appears in front of Cloud over and over, and there's a lot of times where Cloud will freak out, and you don't know if the characters around him can see Sephiroth. They're always like, Cloud, are you okay? Is everything all right? And I assume that at this point it's in Cloud's mind until they reach the Shinra building and they run into Genova being stored there in Hoja's laboratory. Now I think that's when they can finally see Sephiroth. My issue with that now is these characters look at Cloud, clash with this random swordsman that just appears in the middle of nowhere. They slash this bridge, everybody gets separated, there's a bunch of explosions, this guy looks super powerful, he gives Cloud his run for the money, and no one addresses it after. In the dialogue, it's like, I hope Cloud's okay. No one's saying, who the heck was that guy? No one's saying, hey, was that Sephiroth? Tifa's not addressing it, she knows who Sephiroth is. Why isn't she talking about it? And I think this is when the plot really starts to derail at the very end of that Shinra building section. Now again, that's perfectly fine if that's how you want to introduce him, but I feel like there's not enough dialogue to really justify him as a character being there. You know, Cloud doesn't say to the party, guys, that was Sephiroth, we really gotta buckle down here. There's like no kind of implication to kind of say, this is who this guy is, and we're in trouble. So we get to the end of the Shinra building portion, and things are similar to the original game. And then all of a sudden, all of those arbiters of fate, all of those whispers, just start to flood Midgar. Then they get to the end of the road after escaping Shinra, and Sephiroth is there, he stops Cloud. I'm still okay with this change, it's fine. If they had a fight right there, I would have been fine with that too. And then we just move on to the next game. But no, what happens here is that some completely left field plot twist was just introduced where, hey guys, here's the deal, we gotta change our fate. Why? For what? I feel like these characters haven't experienced any part of the original game to make that decision or that choice to defy fate. No one, I mean, I know some of them are seeing glimpses of the future. Some of them saw glimpses of the past. If this happened much later on in this remake, I probably wouldn't even have an issue with it either. If this is how it was at the end, where they start to learn what's gonna happen in the original timeline, who they lose, what the cost is, and how it ends up in the end, and then they think about how they're gonna defy destiny, I think that would have been fine. I wouldn't be as upset. But at the end of this, and it's just the delivery of it that I have an issue with. I don't have an issue with the changes. I have an issue with the delivery. We just start seeing a bunch of cutscenes that no newcomer in the Final Fantasy series would understand. We start seeing characters that aren't introduced. They're not named. They're just there. For example, Zack. Zack is one of Cloud's mentors, a great friend to Cloud who helped him in a dire situation. He sacrifices himself to save Cloud. If you've played the original, you're under the assumption that you have to play the original to understand what's going on. New people have no idea what's happening. So after they escape Shinra and they get to the end of the highway to escape Midgar, they see Sephiroth standing there. He says cryptic things as always. Sephiroth never makes any sense outside the original game. He just says cryptic things to Cloud all the time and never makes any sense. And then some random portal opens and he says more cryptic things, goes into the portal. Cloud tries to run after him, and then Aerith steps in, and all of a sudden she's a wise sage. She seemed like some AI that just processed a bunch of information and is telling them directions on what comes next. And then she just sprinkled some magic on it. It turns gold, and then now they can step in and fight Destiny. I don't understand. So people can just summon Destiny at any point in time? What is Aerith's impact on that? What did she do to the portal? Why did it change from when Sephiroth stepped in there? And it was at that point in time where I knew that I was not gonna like the ending. They all decided to defy Destiny for whatever reason. So up to that point, they only see glimpses of a future that they don't really understand. So as far as we know, in the original game, an apocalypse is stopped, and these are the visions they're seeing, and they still decide that they need to change their destiny. They need to be on this path, this path to freedom. And that's why this seems like a huge excuse for the developers to be able to take this story wherever they want it. They wanted to write in a plot device to allow them to change the story. And in my opinion, I felt like they should have showed more and said less. Aerith is there spewing on about it. We get into this portal with this huge tangible form of destiny that you can apparently kill, and you destroy it. That's basically the final boss. Sephiroth shows up for a bit. Then him and Cloud have this outrageous battle, and then they end up at the end of creation. How? How did you end up there? What is the method of reaching the end of creation? What does it mean to get there? Why are these things being introduced at the very end of a part one of a series of games? We don't even know how many yet. Why is this being introduced now? It drives me crazy. Why in the last chapter? It's not like you're subtly building up. I mean, the whispers were one thing, but we barely got to understand what they even were until the end of the game, where it's like, well, now we gotta kill fate, we gotta kill destiny. The storytelling at the end was just absolutely atrocious. People on the opposite side of my opinion are saying, I can't wait to see where they take this. This just allows them to write the story however they want. They could have just written the story however they want from the get-go. If you're doing a remake and you want to make it an alternate universe, I don't see people being so upset with that, because if you're doing it anyway, you're doing it anyway. Why do you have to write a plot device in there, a ridiculous plot device, to justify it? It would have been much better, in my opinion. And let me put this, I mean, a lot of people may not agree with me on this one, but I think if you just introduce subtle changes to the story, and it's still well written, it's still well paced, and then things just slowly keep changing in different parts. People who are supposed to die live. People who live start dying. And you're like, this is different. That's not what I expected. You're like, whoa, you're expecting a remake of the original game, and then things subtly start to change, and you realize, whoa, this is not the same game. They're building something up. And I feel like that's what they're trying to do, but that ending was really the worst way to justify those means. You just introduce these random entities. I cannot stand when fate and destiny are tangible beings that can be killed or destroyed. When gods with this unlimited power are just introduced and shoehorned in. And this is a Final Fantasy trope. This happens all the time in Final Fantasy, and there's certain times where I can swallow it, but this was a reason where it felt so out of place. Another reason people are saying this is justified is because this is a full game, and at the end there needs to be this grandiose boss. I mean, come on, you couldn't just have Cloud fight Sephiroth at the end of that highway and like had this crazy battle where he gets his ass whooped. You know what I'm saying? Just so that we're still grounded. Sephiroth is there, he reveals himself as a villain, he says something meaningful to Cloud, and then bounces and says he's gonna continue his mission or whatever he needs to do. I think it would have served as a great final boss if he was just there testing them, instead of having to take down Destiny as a reason to be able to do whatever you want with the plot. And again, I think I'll speak for a lot of fans who say that they didn't mind changes. Everyone loved how Midgar was fleshed out as a city. Characters are fleshed out, new people were added. We got to learn more about characters from the original that weren't in the game for very long. We got to learn about motives behind certain characters and backstories, things like that. Everyone embraces those changes 100%. And I think there are subtle changes to the plot that aren't exactly the same. And people are like, yeah, I prefer the original, but that's fine. You know, certain segments, you know, where the change, I feel like they could have done that for the whole game and then slowly show that it's an alternate universe and not have to give a reason as to why it's an alternate universe, because it's a remake. You're creating a different game, and if you don't want to trample on the original game, I think that's fine, and I think a lot of people would have been okay with that. A lot of people don't understand the ending. They don't know what it's supposed to be. It's not packaged as a proper cliffhanger, in my opinion. A cliffhanger is not supposed to have you at the end like, wait, what just happened? I guess I gotta wait for the next part to explain it to me. A cliffhanger is more like, whoa, I can't wait to see what happens next. I understand what's going on here, but I can't wait to see what happens next. And I think that's what makes a cliffhanger more effective. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I just felt very passionate about this because this game had so much potential for me. And I'm not saying the whole experience was ruined, but it just did leave a bad, it left a shitty feeling in my stomach at the end because I just feel all of it was super shoehorned in. And there's no explanation as to how these means were obtained to take down this god of fate or this arbiter of fate. It just went to this astronomically supernatural moment when the whole game was pretty much grounded one way or another. And I think that's what frustrates me the most, is these characters just kind of like they just took it. They're just like, oh, okay, I guess that's how the world works. You know, they're not like saying, what does that mean? Or what are those things? Or who are these people? Or, you know, they're not asking the questions that are going on in my head. So that makes me feel like I should be complacent with what they're feeding me. There's no interaction at the end with the characters that are like, wait, why should we even defy destiny? What's gonna happen to us? You know, there's none of these questions are being passed around these characters. Aerith is just kind of saying, hey guys, this is a mission if you choose to accept it. Even with that said, I will probably see what news they're going to release with part 2. I know it's going to be some time until we get it, which makes this a little bit more frustrating. But that obviously means the plot can be taken in different directions. This is not a direct remake. This is obviously a different timeline or an alternate reality or even a sequel, as some people are calling it. You know, all of that's fine to me. I just feel the delivery at the end just did not stick the landing that they were trying to achieve. And I feel like a lot of it is left to part 2 to pick up the pieces on. And the thing is, I know Nomura and his team. I've seen what the work that they've put out. Nomura is not my favorite person in the world. Not him as a character, but him as a director in series. You know, the direction he took Kingdom Hearts, it's convoluted. It scares off newcomers. It's hard to share the good parts about certain things when you come up with these super contrived plots and these things that are hard to swallow because they're so poorly written at times. How can I introduce or talk to a friend about Final Fantasy Remake when they get to the end and they're like, what the fuck was that? I feel like this could have been a huge entry level to a brand new set of Final Fantasy VII fans, and maybe it is right now. But I feel like when they get to that end and they're left completely confused, it's gonna take away a lot of what could have been. It's gonna take away a lot of people who probably would have invested in part 2 if they really stuck that landing properly and kept it grounded the way it was in the original game, or, you know, slightly variant from the original game. It could have been a little bit more extravagant. I would have been okay with a fight with Sephiroth or a bigger fight with Jenova, for instance. I mean, we already went to supernatural gods and defying fate. Final Fantasy Remake was marketed as a remake. Everyone thought that if you played this, you would get a gist of the story, if not a much more fleshed out one of the original. People knew there were going to be changes, but they didn't think it would be a completely different thing. I think people are okay with the fact that it's completely different, but if it was marketed that way, I feel like it would have been even better. But now that we understand that you had to have played the original game for this to make complete sense to you, are they gonna spoon feed this information to us in part 2? And if you're not reading interviews from the devs, and if you're not looking at gaming news, and if you're not heavily up on that type of information and you just casually buy games that you see commercials for instance, or you hear about via word of mouth or social media, you're not gonna know this. This is part 1 of the game. You're gonna buy this thinking, okay, well, if I buy this, I get to experience that remastered feel of Final Fantasy VII when I missed out back in 1997. I feel like a lot of newcomers are believing that. And so when you get to the end of the game and you have no idea what's going on and you're seeing all these flashes, it's hard for me to swallow that as a newcomer and how they would process it, because it makes no sense. It barely makes sense to me, and I feel like it's gonna turn off a lot of people to that sequel. With that said, even how angry I am, I will be checking out part 2. I may even stream hard mode for this original game on my streams. So definitely, if you're interested in that, leave a comment. If any of this upset you as well, please leave a comment below. I just want to hear everyone's thoughts and everyone's takes on the ending, or just the game in general. How did you like the game? Am I wrong? Did you think that the ending made sense? Was it something that you're okay with? I just felt like shit hit the fan way too quickly. Anyway, folks, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. I never say that. That's the most cliche thing ever, but please do. Support my channel, help this grow. We're almost at 10,000 subscribers, and I would love to get there and triumphantly come back to you guys and say we've reached that goal. With that said, my children, be safe. The prophet has spoken.